Good afternoon, everybody. We're here today to talk about the future of women at work. As I'm from McKinsey, a consultancy, I thought we'd start with some market research, including some audience participation. So can you put your hands up if you identify as being a woman? How many of you have a sibling who's a woman? How many of you have any relation that is a woman? Ah, everyone. Excellent. So this talk is going to be highly relevant to all of us. And what do we mean by the future of women at work? Well, it's what do industries, jobs, and occupations look like over the next 10 years. And it's where predictable physical work is going to be increasingly done by robotics and autonomous systems. And predictable cognitive work is going to be done by software increasingly, often with an artificial intelligence component. And we know how the future of work is going to impact millions of lives for the UK. But how will it impact women?
It seems to possibly there are going to be lots of problems in socially deprived areas. So those are the kind of areas where you don't have good education system, you don't have good healthcare, and you do not have sophisticated advanced technology employers. I grew up in Blackpool, and it's just as appalling today as it was 40 years ago when I was a kid. You know, the kind of work people have is seasonal. They have to rely on social benefits in winter. There is very little escape routes. How do we upskill those people?
It's a great question. So something that's not on, we haven't looked at today yet, but we definitely do internally, is the regional diversity element to this. Because that is another element that looks like it's going to get significantly aggravated over the next 10 years. There's a pretty strong correlation between regions which have suffered from high unemployment in the last 10 years and those that are going to see the weakest demand for employment over the next 10 years. So things like London becoming, which has done well over the last 10 years, we expect this to do even better. Somewhere like Blackpool, unless something changes quite dramatically, is harder. There's a number of barriers to this education. So one of them is where jobs are going. This is hard to shape. There's always going to be these accruing economies of scale to cities, where because there's an existing talent pool of your data scientists and data engineers here, and your software developers, if you ever wanted to start a company or hire in, or start the function of the company that needs those skills, it's always going to start accruing to those who've already been there already, because you get the talent there, you get the companies, you get the infrastructure. So the jobs and the employment is difficult without kind of active national industrial strategy, because naturally they'll want to drift into the hubs that have done them already. The other side of it, the barriers, is the educational access. That is one that you already have infrastructure there for. Again, it will be unequal, but that is also where you should focus. So where jobs can be put in Blackpool, or whether it was to complement anything done by trying to incentivize employers to put them there, you'd have the infrastructure at least that you could be leveraging for adult education, but it wouldn't be what's done today, probably. Another quick stat would be, in terms of what's spent on education, the education budget, I think, is about 90 billion in that ballpark for education department. In terms of what's spent on adults today by the government, it's under 5. And there's a lot more adults than there are those who are the children and young adults. So that would be the third piece. It would be the financing of this. So if you have the jobs, the actual education there, you then need to probably help those people access the training.
It'll be interesting to see. We're hearing a lot at the moment about the levelling up agenda that the government's got and changing infrastructure and moving around the country, and it'll be very interesting to see how much that plays to the kind of points you make about black parts of the country that haven't had attention recently. Someone there? Yeah, Catherine.
Thank you for your talk. I just wondered, do you have views about actually triggering the motivation for people to want to start investing in themselves, possibly? Because from your statistics, it looks like either you're at university or you're not, and if you're not at university, you've got the skills that are going to be under threat, whereas those at university are able to transition perhaps a little bit more easily, and they're in the system anyway. But I just wonder if you've got views on the motivation of getting more people involved in wanting to become engaged in this process.
Yeah. So it's a huge thing. We know from adult education, it is not the case that access equals take-up. Far from it. If we look at what exists today, there are programs where you could borrow to do adult education, but I think they've hardly been used by people. So it's not enough just to put stuff out there, either by the government or as an employer, and just to leave it there. It has to be something about getting those people to use it, exactly as you say. And one part is motivation, and the other part is also just information access. And these things are related, because if you're highly motivated, I'm sure you could find information. But it's also a sector that's so hard to find out kind of what's the right thing to do as well, especially for those who are at their most vulnerable. So in the job centres that we have today, you'll be presented kind of with, let's say you lose your job and then you go into them and they will look at what is a high vacancy rate for jobs at your skill level today, which is one way to do it. But you can also imagine a world where this is preemptive, basically. So whilst people are in work, exactly as you say, when it's best to work with them. An example done in Denmark is their job centre equivalents will reach out to people preemptively. So once they heard that some factory is going to shut down, they will try to reach out and contact those workers to help them into work before they leave work. And a statistic they have is, Denmark has 20% long-term unemployed as opposed to 30% for the OECD. There's something that they're doing there about keeping people in work and trying to transition them into a job before you need to really get them out of that low point. Seems to be a really interesting idea. On the motivation itself, I think one of the things as well is helping people understand what things are going to be happening over the next 5-10 years. So if you were told that a certain piece of adult education often led to a higher return on investment, people who do this, like you, did this training, and they came out with a higher wage, I think that would also really help, which we in this room might have a feel that if I went away and did some course on data science, maybe I could transition jobs. But I think in a much more granular way, that could be done by just improving the information that's out there.
Thank you very much. I thought your talk was excellent, by the way. I was quite interested that I think you showed a slide that showed the correlation between education females and in female-dominated jobs. I was wondering if you looked at the correlation between education and women in jobs dominated by men as opposed to dominated by women, and if so, what did you unearth from the research? Because we do have some large tech giants, as we know, that employ women, but I'm sure all of us have seen the stories in the paper, one of them which has been sued in the States because of the fact they're underpaying women across the piece, and they're doing the same jobs as their male counterparts. So I think the future of work is great, but I'm wondering what, if anything, insights you've got about actually making sure that men or women and women get paid the same amount of money for doing the same job.
Awesome. And that was my favourite page too. So unfortunately, we haven't looked at a more granular layer below that yet. I think it would be really interesting too. But that's just a kind of data availability question. But we have right now with what we're working with, it's at an occupation level. But it would be really interesting to see how that would work below. And you're absolutely right, I don't speak in the pages here or the research we've done about that cultural element and that softer side, which is the other thing that's kind of missing here. That's really changing the nature of the workforce. So it's hard for us to put a number to it, but there's for sure barriers there that we know exist. Slightly related to your question, but also just because I found it quite interesting. I know that some of the narrative about boards is how they've got better at gender diversity, and not dissimilar to how tech similarly is trying to tell this story about how it's got better. But at least with the boards, there's an interesting statistic where for Fortune 500 companies, there's more CEOs called John than those who are women. So it tells you that even when we're seeing, improvements, these are from a low base, and there's a missing cultural element. Yeah.
We'll all say amen to that. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm missing anybody out there. I'll just ask you, so you mentioned things are going to be changing in the future, and we this audience in particular know that very well. What kind of jobs do you anticipate will be available for people? What is it they should be upskilling for?
Yeah, and you wouldn't be the first person to ask me that as well. And what job should I even do in the next 5 years? And also, as you know, it's impossible to answer these questions for an individual, but the kind of fun one that I give is a cloud support engineer. This is a job that's pretty well paid, and you don't actually need a long background in software. What I think is really interesting, especially, is if I was to give you that answer and you said, brilliant, that sounds interesting, I'd like to become one, is what you do after that. Do you consider a university degree to become a cloud support engineer? So maybe, but do you have £20,000 to £30,000 to spend on those fees? Not often. Do you have 3 years to give up for a reskilling opportunity when you're an adult in the workforce? Almost definitely no. And even if you had those two things, how would you pick the right place to go study this? There's so little information out there about, for adult education, for employability rates or return on investment. I think I saw someone do this for another European country, but they did a scrape of 10,000 websites for training courses, and they looked at how many of those training courses were giving some sort of information on the return on investment. If you do this training course, X% of people are employed, this % of people get this wage, anything like that. And the number was 1%. If we think about the shifts that need to happen and the amount of people that need to change job and change their skills, it can't be that we're making this on the basis of almost no information about what the right training course is, even if we know what the right job is.
I believe that the careers work is doing an exhibition today. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's some work that's happening between Exeter and IBM, I think it is, that's leading it, and somebody else, I can't remember what the third institution is. But that's essentially trying to develop a tool within the IoC framework, trying to develop a tool for people to go onto a website and work out what skills they've got, where they'd like to end up, what skills they need for that thing, and then some work to get them from here to there. And there's similarly, under the auspices of the Industry Advisory Board, there's some work going on about how do we signpost to the courses we've got, particularly the online programs that are proving very popular, because for the reasons you say, people don't have to give up their job, they can do it alongside. So there is a lot of work already going on under the IoC's auspices, but there's a great deal to be done, as we know. So was there another question there?
Hello, it's Justin from FutureLearn, picking up just on that, so thanks for that, good segue. I'm in agreement with a lot of what you're saying, and then there's that bit, when you're thinking, so what do we do next? And this is my job to think about, and I'm still fumbling around in the dark. So as you said there, people don't have 3 years, they don't have a bunch of money. The Institute of Coding is a collaboration of lots and lots of university partners. Universities often think about big structural pieces of learning. So if you were advising universities for free in a minute, what would you say that they needed to do to shape up for this particular challenge to deliver a new kind of learning opportunity?
I would say to them, for free, initially. That we're about to see a huge opportunity for growth for the university sector if they want to opt into it. That right now, who they generally train up is the 18 to 24-year-olds, which is a fair amount of the UK. There's also the 25 through to 65-year-olds. Many of these people are going to need to be reskilled. I think universities should be part of that answer, for sure, especially where they have the expertise in some of these high-skilled or highly technical industries. I would never think they'd be the only part of the answer for the wider the UK. We know there needs to be a lot of reskilling at the lower end of the spectrum, where things like practical learning and more kind of apprenticeship learning on the job can be very useful. But I would think whether they can think about something that offers training to help adults who are looking to either advance in their careers, but also at risk of unemployment. And yeah, look at training packages there to improve adult employability. There's not loads which offer, there's not enough for the future demand right now, so they could definitely think about that.
Interesting, we'll come full circle back to Liz.
Just listening to you speak there, Bill's from BCS, and we've worked a lot on education stuff. I was interested, have you actually looked at our current below university education and made any commentary about its, what it's doing in terms of preparing our young people for the jobs of the future?
So our recent research has focused on those who are above that. The reason being is of the workforce who's going to be taking those jobs for the next 10 years. 85% of those people are in work today. And so that's where we focus our answer on. If we were to look at the lower age spectrum of education, I think one of the kind of meta points that's going to be coming out from here is that there's this skill of learning to learn, that we're no longer in this age where we do this one big download of information and that sets you up for the next 50 years of your job. I do think part of it is also going to be these digital and STEM skills. They've been important before, but they're going to become more important in the future. So similar to your work, I think there's more that can be done there.